Welcome to Creative Strings Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Howes, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Rebecca Clare Douglas. She's a multifaceted musician and person, and I wanted to ask her to share with you just things about her life because she's had so many diverse experiences that have framed her work as a musician, as an educator, and in her overall development. And I thought a lot of it would just be really interesting to you. A couple things is that she's written a book of original fiddle tunes, which I think is really cool. She's also touring with her original fiddle duo, Douglas and Moss, all over the UK. I do want to thank our sponsor, Electric Violin Shop. Electric Violin Shop is my go-to for all things electric strings. So just anything having to do with gear. If you're a bowed string player, anything that has to do with gear, if you have a question, call them. Pickups, loop pedals, amplifiers, electric instruments, and really just any questions. That's the greatest thing about Electric Violin Shop. They are an employee-owned co-op. I know for people personally, call them at their website, at their phone number at their website, electricviolinshop.com. Call them during business hours and a human will help you with whatever you've got. And now I'd like to welcome our guest, Rebecca Clare Douglas. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Chris.
So briefly, from what I understand, please correct me if I've got it wrong, you went to school at Oxford for an academic music degree that included performance and some composition. This academic music degree is interesting to me. It must have been a cool training, and it was at Oxford. I'm sure it was deep. But after that, you had a varied career as a performer and a teacher, and then you went into a lot of other things and also being a parent. And I wonder if you could tell me, especially I'd love to start with, once you became a parent, which maybe was 10 years after you got out of Oxford, if anything shifted for you and how you thought about the combination of being a parent and being a multifaceted musician.
Yeah, it was a challenge for me. I think I absolutely wanted to be a parent. It was incredibly intentional to become a parent, something I really wanted to do. And yet it was a challenge because I'm used to running around at 1 billion miles an hour. I'm used to achieving at a relatively high level. If you get into Oxford University, you had to work for that. So yeah, I found it really challenging stepping back from that very active life of teaching and performing. I kept hold of it a little bit. In some ways, actually, I was ready for a break as a teacher, to be honest. But immediately people started asking me whether I would teach at home. So I kept that thread going. And I also kept the performing thread going a little bit. But yeah, it was really stepped back during that time. I come from quite a rural area and there wasn't any provision for preschool music around near to me. So I actually just started my own group. So that was great because that was a way of introducing my son to basic musical education at an early age and also extending that to other people. And yeah, I had a whole thing going on. We call them teddy bears. I think you call them stuffies or something. But I had this thing going on with Music Bear. And still, sometimes I go into my town and I haven't done this for years and years, but people all say, "Oh, it's Music Bear, Claire."
Yeah.
So that was fun to do.
No, this brings to mind for me this idea that there's a lot of people who do teaching, but then they don't also do performing, or they do one or the other. But it sounds like you did both pretty heavy at different times.
Yeah.
Do you find that's also common, I don't know, in the UK or for people that you've known, that they tend to be more compartmentalized? Or I'm just curious.
Generally, to do an academic music degree in the UK, you do actually have to be a performer as well. And also the conservatoire training, from what I understand, although I haven't received it myself, but I think it has become more academic over the years. When I was applying for my further education, I did look at going to the Royal Northern College of Music and doing a joint degree with Manchester University, which is another top university in the UK, which was considered to be quite a difficult thing to do at the time. But I think they're coming closer together nowadays, the academic and the performing side. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I can relate to this personally. Like I used to be very heavy in just perform, and then switching to being a teacher was a big switch for me. And just thinking about how do I balance these things? Like how do I actually identify or how to explain to people what I do? I guess if I understand correctly, you've always been performing and you've always been teaching. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. So I resisted teaching. I come from a family of teachers, not music teachers, but teachers. And to be honest, I had in my head when I was growing up, don't know whether you have this in the US, but we have this phrase, those who can do and those who can't teach. And I had that going around in my head as though it was kind of a lesser profession, or it meant I'd failed as a performer or whatever. But of course, what I realized very early on, because my first students literally came to me when I was at university. They were fellow students on different courses, but they'd come to me and say, oh, I want to learn the piano, or I want to learn the violin. And as I taught them, I fell in love with that. I didn't think of it at first as teaching, but as sharing how to do something. It felt different to me to what I was expecting. I have always been a performer and I've always been a teacher. And although I might have held performance as something more of a goal of mine than teaching, I've always loved doing both. I think it might be interesting for you to let that around the time that I was deciding where to go, whether I should go to music college, a conservatoire, or whether to go down the academic route. I was already quite advanced as a classical. I'd gone through all of the ABRSM grades. I know you have that in the US as well, but that's the gold standard, or has been in the UK. So I'd gone through that. I was moving forwards even before I got to university. And I went privately to a teacher who taught at one of the top, but he was quite young. I was probably one of the first people he taught at college, and we just didn't see eye to eye. And he actually told me that I was so bad, I should give up as a performer. I should give up as a violinist. And obviously that crushed me at the time. And it took me many years to recover from that, but I think it's really influenced who I am as a teacher. And it has brought into sharp focus for me the question of what is a musician? What is a teacher? What is a successful musician? What do you need to be a successful musician and to be a successful performer and to be a successful teacher? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. What does that look like? How did that inform? And what is your definition of that? Yeah, maybe I'll just insert myself into this for a second. What comes up for me is that as musicians, we often put a tremendous amount of pressure on ourselves and compare ourselves in all kinds of ways to be so many different things. And so even if like we find ourselves as a parent suddenly, then it might be tempting to be like, oh, but I'm not practicing 3 hours a day, like, and be punishing ourselves or something, or like, I'm not getting the top gigs with so-and-so or at such and such festival or whatever. So I feel like that has pushed me over time to think more deeply about that as well. And to recognize, first of all, that it was kind of succumbing to this almost peer pressure and almost like a prisoner of these ridiculous expectations for the wrong reasons. And that basically I just needed to do work on myself as far as like my psychology and coming to quote unquote, coming to Jesus or coming down to earth and being like, look, what's this really all about? What's important is that I'm a good dad. What's important is that I'm healthy. And I should stop like chasing these whatever ridiculous ideas of just trying to be admired by everybody else for whatever I'm doing. And then look for more inward self-validation, like true self-validation, and for the right reasons. I know that's what comes up for me. Sorry, this is your interview. But what do you think about any of that?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And knowing you and your work as well, one of the things that I think you're really successful at as a teacher is that whole area of everyone is good enough. Everyone is good enough. That's a starting point. And to slightly reframe that, I think the question that I was asking myself was the wrong question for many years. The question I was asking myself was, am I good enough for classical music, Western art music? And actually, the proper question should have been, is classical music, Western art music enough for me? And the answer is no.
Oh, wow. Wow.
For me personally, it's not enough. It's not enough. I love it. I couldn't love it more. Absolutely. I love it more and more, actually, ironically, the more that I do other things, but absolutely love it. But I've only got to this point of absolutely loving it when I have let go of my perceived restrictions of it and what it's asking of me.
Now that is beautiful. I love that. I didn't see that coming and I should have. I'm so glad you shared that. And like maybe briefly then we can segue into talking about how you really took on folk music, different types of folk music, I believe, and other styles of music out beyond classical, the training that you have. To such an extent that now you're touring with your own original folk music duo. And you've even written a book of fiddle tunes that they can find you at Rebecca Clare Douglas.com. Clare is spelled Clare, Rebecca Clare Douglas.com. So I guess, tell me a little bit about what has your journey into folk music given you, which it feels like it probably relates to some of the things you just said, which is beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started fumbling towards this folk music thing as I was beginning to unravel that question about, am I good enough for classical music? Is classical music good enough for me? Whatever. So I was listening. I felt, to start with, that like it was almost like sometimes going towards folk music is sometimes referred to by folk musicians. When they see classical musicians doing it, they refer to it as going to the dark side. There's that element of, wow, it's a bit edgy to even think about listening to other musics and considering them. I actually started off through a very conventional route, if you like. I started playing with a Highland fiddle band, so that's Scottish music, Highland fiddle band, for very high society balls. So they're called Highland balls. Dances a lot in folk music in the, I believe you call it the Celtic tradition, we would just call it folk music tradition. We would often call them céilís from the Gaelic word. But this music that I was invited to play by another classical musician, and I was part of a fiddle band. I still am, actually. They're called the Pictish Players. And we play for these big Highland balls that are mostly put on for landowners. We're talking about the kind of vestiges of the aristocracy. But that was reading dots. That was still reading. The tunes were collected together, reading off those dots and still playing in quite a classical style. If you think about, for those people that like watching period dramas, Jane Austen, if you think about Jane Austen in Tartan.
Downton Abbey.
Downton Abbey. Think of Downton Abbey. Think of Downton Abbey in tartan doing a ball, and that would be the idea of your Highland ball.
So playing these quote-unquote Celtic tunes or British Isles folk tunes, it sounds like you're making a parallel more to there's this almost like a classical sensibility of it, like reading the dots and doing it in this very like formal situation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. So this is really, I find this really fascinating, because just as in classical music, hopefully we are informed enough nowadays to not play Bach like Tchaikovsky or the other way around. You know, brass fingerings and open strings and tempo and so many things that you think about.
Well articulated.
Yeah, but just everything. You think about these in very different ways. Within the folk community, there are so many subsections, so many regional styles. I'm only just scratching the surface, and I haven't grown up in this tradition. I've learned all I can about it, and I'm continuing to do that. Obviously, you can divide things up into Irish music and Scottish music and English music, and then I know a little bit about Canadian music, less about bluegrass. But then within that, there's so many regional differences. The north of Ireland is very different. South of Ireland, Highland music in Scotland is different from the borders. So it's all really interesting. And I liken it to like regional accents. We have so many regional accents, some of which are totally impenetrable, really, to understand. We're speaking in the UK, and we have that in folk music as well. And it's really interesting to see these tunes travel. And when they travel from Ireland to England to, I don't know, Canada and the US, and often they come back and it's like Chinese whispers, and something's changed about these tunes. And often I'll be playing what I think is a Scottish tune, and then it suddenly goes off in a different direction. And it's because it's been to Ireland, or it's been to several countries and come back in a slightly different form. Yeah.
That's great. It's also interesting to me as you're talking about the things that are interesting, being a folk musician for yourself, about playing folk music. And you were talking about how in the classical music community, people might view it as, oh, it's edgy to play folk music. Yeah, I think there can be a lot of feelings about it from people who aren't inside of folk music.
I understand what you're saying. And I think that what comes up for me is it always goes back listening to what these people do, rather than, yes, you might then analyze it yourself or ask a teacher, what have you noticed about Irish playing versus Scottish playing or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, as a teacher, I'd probably say, hey, you should listen to this. Listen to what this guy does, or listen to what this guy does, or listen to this band. And when I have taught small groups of classical violinists about transitioning a little bit into folk, that's the kind of thing I've done. I said, hey, you could do it like this. Maybe I've demonstrated. You could do it like this. You could do it like that. I've generalized hugely, but given some kind of stylistic context, if you like, about Irish versus English. But it's the kind of conversations I think are really authentic to folk music. It's the kind of conversations I have with my duo partner all the time on the way to gigs. He'll put some music on. He'll go, hey, have you heard how this guy's doing this thing? And what I really like is, and I go, yeah, that's just so-and-so or whatever. Oh, it's a bit different to this. And I think as long as you refer back to your ears again and again, I think that's the thing. It's really hard to quantify it if you're just putting it in words or writing it down or something. And it's really interesting. You talked to me just then about the fact that I have written folk tunes. One of the hardest things for me about writing folk tunes was leaving all that stuff out, was learning to leave anything out. There's no bowings, there are no variations, there are no grace notes, there's nothing in there. And I was very much guided, again, by my duo partner, Richard, who's grown up in the folk tradition. And yet understands, he's a guitarist, he has some classical experience as well. I'd send him these tunes I was writing and he would come back and go, it's too much in that tune. You need to pare it right down. I don't need to know how you play it. I need to know what the tune is. And it's different. It's different. So it's not all about the composer's sort of intention. And I found that very interesting because when I launched a tune book, there are a lot of folk musicians who, they read dots fine, but they don't want to learn it that way. They want to learn it from the person that came up with the tune. There are plenty of people that will compose things, and I put that in inverted commas, but not write it down. They want to know how it sounds, how the thing sounds. And then this is where there's a slight improvisatory element, not to the same extent necessarily as you would when you're taking a solo in jazz. But what can I do with the tune to make it my own? How do I sound? What are my influences? What do I like doing? I know you've also, in an earlier podcast, which I listened to, Marcello De Francesco, you were talking about that a little bit, I think. And you were talking about how if you find something tricky to do, you just don't do it. So there are one or two ornaments when I first started playing a lot of folk Irish style ornaments that they just didn't lie yet with me. But over time, so I just didn't put them in. But over time, I've tried them out and they've become more part of my style. And then, I put them in.
I'm really interested in whatever helps musicians engage more deeply in the process of being a musician. And maybe that's another way to explain my resistance. People get caught up on stylistic nuances. If it detracts them from playing their instrument or writing music, I will say I'm opposed to that, but it's because I'm for having musicians engage, like play.
Yes.
And it's like, Whatever makes you happy to play, I don't care. Like whatever you're into. That's why I love the fact that you've written these two, because play or write or teach, I think it's when we engage. That's what I want to. That's why I'm really interested in helping people to find ways for themselves to engage. And we were talking earlier about just for both of us, I think, how fear stops us from engaging. Fear of that. What are people going to think if I do this? And so I just believe like we all have a lot of fear, and that's the big piece of it is how can we overcome the fear and just do the thing that we want to do. That's probably, and that's why I think your story is inspiring, because you've done all these things. Like you're teaching, you're writing, you're playing, you're being a parent, you've worked for schools, you've just had so many things. And people, again, you can see Claire's stuff at Rebecca Clare Douglas, CLARE.com. So, and they can buy your book of fiddle tunes, and you also do some teaching sometimes. Tell me about some of the classes that you have been teaching or that you'd like to teach for other musicians, or what that might look like.
And the other thing I'll just clarify as well is because we were talking about the tune book. Folk musicians, because they don't often like to learn things, a lot of them when I produce this tune book say, oh, it's great, but we'd like to hear you play them. So I then just released the CD that follows the tunes in order of the book. So you can learn them either way, and both ways. You can have the CD and the book and decide which way to do it. But yeah, and that in itself was a very interesting process. To what extent am I going to vary these tunes? Because I want them to sound alive. I don't want them to sound academic when I play them back, but I don't want to overdo it so that they're not easily recognizable, say, for a classical musician who has got the dots in front of them and just says, you're not playing anything that's written. So that's interesting. And I think, to answer the question that you actually asked me, I think that's what I like doing in the classes, is to engage with ways of learning, to engage with different ways of looking at things. I love teaching classical musicians a little bit of freedom, because I had to learn so much by ear now from the folk music tradition, and it's something I'm still working on. I like to be able to bring that to the musicians that I teach. I do some piano teaching, and if I see that someone isn't on that classical route, which, let's face it, not many people are on that, let's practice for 5 hours a day kind of classical route, that's fine if they are. I've just been working on trying to find a suitable concerto for a really amazing student that I've got that's a piano student. But equally, I will have lots of people that come to me and I can just see that the light isn't on in their eyes for music. And I'm like, why are you here? Something's brought you through my door. So what can I do so that you become a musician that is self-governing and self-motivated as you move forward? What can I do so that you don't need me anymore? You don't need to be fed. You just need to be coached. So therefore, I will do things like teach chording and how to read lead sheets and things like that, particularly for pianists and for violinists, viola players. Yeah, if we want to explore the folk tradition, we do that. I've also walk them through some of your classes and the free stuff you've got on YouTube, if I think that's appropriate. Yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to create, or help to create, or support the creation of musicians who are alive musically and who hopefully will then share their music, because that's the other thing. There's too many people. Yeah, fair enough. If you want to just enjoy it on your own, yeah, absolutely. That's great. If that's coming from a place of, this is the thing I love to do the most, that's fine. If it's coming from a place of, I love music, but I'm too scared to share it, then that's not fine, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm trying to get them to think, maybe I could share this music in some way. Then as well, I'm really interested in people seeing themselves as contributing through their music. Too often we see music as being this nice little thing on the side, the icing on the cake of civilization or whatever it is. And I think it's absolutely fundamental. And again, that's one of the things I love about the folk music tradition, because people get together in community. We're in the pub, we share tunes. We're not talking, we don't have to talk. We have a tune, we share a tune, and it goes well, or people love that sense of community, that entrainment with each other. Or I've got a useful skill. I can play for a ceilidh. One of the things I taught myself to do was how to be a ceilidh pianist. This was far away from what I'd learned as a classical pianist. It was really difficult. But to be able to do that, I love it when somebody gets in touch with me and they ask me to do a gig and I think it's useful. I do a lot of work in the wedding industry with a rock and pop string quartet. We're called What's the Pluck? And I just love that. I love turning up to somebody's wedding, and we have the guy whose business it is. He is a fantastic arranger, great string player as well. And he's a great arranger. He's called Alex Phillips. And he creates all this amazing music, these amazing arrangements. There's something new every single gig. And I just love it when you see two people getting married and we play their song or whatever they want. And they're like, we didn't know you could play that. And we didn't know this was possible. And I just love how that brings people together.
Yeah, I agree with all that. That all resonates with me too. And I'm curious if I can ask you like one more main question, which is about like the managing of your musical life and career or business or whatever we want to call it. Because I find that a lot of musicians struggle with how to be proactively like seeking gigs or seeking clients or students, or that's part of why I really like you sharing the diversity of the things you're doing too, just to show people that like it's possible to do all these things. And frankly, I'll just say too, I love playing weddings too, honestly. Yeah. And some people might think, if he's a jazz violinist, that he should only do these certain types of things and then playing a wedding is beneath but it's, first of all, everything you said about weddings, like it's a positive thing. And second of all, it usually pays well. So it's, why would I not play a wedding? Give me a break. You know what I mean? Yeah.
There are so many things in what you've just said there, and I bet I forget to reply to them all. My brain was working and there's so many resonances. One was, I'm going to sound quite rude, but I think learn something from every musical situation, and you can't get something from every single musical situation, then you're not using your whole brain. And you're not using your whole self. You're not using yourself holistically. I know it's trained into us. If you're a classical musician, this whole inferiority, superiority thing, you sit next to a new desk partner, are they better than me or worse than me? And until that pecking order is sorted out, it's really difficult, isn't it? But going back to the work I used to do in amateur orchestras, it used to strike me sometimes that I'd be sitting there while the conductor was working endlessly with the wind on their tuning or whatever it was. And I was there for a 2-hour rehearsal on a Sunday morning. And I would be thinking, I wonder if I did that. I'd be asking my question, if I did that bowing there differently, how would that be? Or even just, I wonder how my bow hold looks today. Or just like anything. Like my brain was like there to do music and there to be solving technical problems and performance problems. And yet I'd look round and there'd be other people looking totally bored. And I used to think, this is a waste of your time. If you're just coming here and you're being bored, then you're not really getting very much. And then they'd complain and they'd say, well, it was a boring rehearsal. And I go, it was different. We didn't do very much playing, but did you notice this or that? Or did you listen to the wind and being alive to learning possibilities? What every situation can present to you, I think is really important. Going back to the wedding thing and you saying you love weddings, where I live, there are so many advantages to playing the number of weddings that I play. I live in a beautiful area of the world. It's near the Lake District, which is Wordsworth country. I'm in Yorkshire, and that's Bronte country, Emily Bronte. It's absolutely stunning countryside. And there I am in the summer months, driving around England and some of the borders of Scotland, just absolutely loving it. I've got my music on, been paid to do it. And then I rock up at some country house hotel. So it's been an old country house and it's been converted into hotel. It's like everywhere I go seems to be steeped in this amazing history. And then people turn up and they look great. And I like looking at what they're wearing and I like people watching. It's what's not to love. So much to love about it. The other thing I was going to say is, and I know I've mentioned this to you before, I've taken from the classical world, if you like, I've taken Bach's example as being someone who I would like to emulate career-wise as a musician.
Yeah.
Have a little, you remember, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got this little motto, which is be more Bach. And then the next tagline is, and less Mozart. Because it always fascinated me. Bach had all these children, he had all these demands all that he had to fulfill financially. There was none of this ivory towers business. There was none of this wandering around with your head in the clouds. If anyone said to Bach, you should be writing the 48 preludes and fugues, you would have just laughed at them, I'm sure, because it's like, better get up and play organ in Leipzig or whatever. I've got to do my job. And what I loved about Bach's example was he'd have something to do. He would have to compose something for a particular service, and he'd run out of ideas. And I can just imagine him in the organ loft going through all the music, and he'd find something by Vivaldi and think, that will do. And he'd recompose it, rearrange it, take a theme from it. And I just loved that idea that he just took what was around him, and from that he alchemized and learned and created more music, which we all love. Now, I don't think if he just sat there with his quill in his ivory tower, letting all his children starve or whatever, I don't think he would have come up with the same music. Whereas Mozart obviously struggled with his being grounded and down to earth and didn't live very long. And what have we lost from the fact that he died so young?
Yeah, that feels really deep to me. More Bach, less Mozart, and it sounds like that's been a guiding principle in your life. Of, I don't know, it almost feels to me it's be industrious, or go out and work, go out and find a way to be productive, contribute something, and then try to be grateful for the fact that you get to do that. And I'm almost hearing that in there. And
yeah,
is that true or not?
Yeah, there's been various times in my life when I've thought, why have I made this particular life decision down south in the UK to do my academic career? I was considering doing a postgrad in a London conservatoire. I was thinking about working in orchestras, all kinds of things. I moved back up north. I moved away from the capital. I then moved away from any city. And then I was living in the middle of nowhere. But I was like, I love living here. It's beautiful. It feeds my soul. Then you set yourself some parameters there. You've got to accept, or I had to accept that. That is part of me. I want to live here. I love the hills. I love going for a walk. I love feeding my soul in this way. What can I do? And it's inelegant. And I've done all kinds of things that perhaps weren't completely suitable, but didn't completely resonate with doing toddler music classes. I enjoyed some of that. I didn't enjoy all of that. Teaching as a peripatetic visiting music teacher in all the different local schools. There were aspects of that I liked, there were aspects I didn't like. I think to be reflective and to think, what do I like about that? And how can I get more of that and less of the other thing? I think that's what's been my guiding principle all the way through. And another motto, if you like, be your own patron. If you can't find somebody to pay you for the kind of playing you want to do, go and get some money from some teaching or from whatever else. And then that's how my duos started out. Didn't expect to make money to start with from Douglas and Moss, which is my folk duo. To be honest, we just got together so that I could actually play the tunes in front of a folk audience so that they'd buy my book. And then it evolved. Oh, yeah, we like playing together. Oh, yeah, we match well. Okay, what can we do next? And we still play. You have to weigh it up. Richard Moss, my musical partner, brilliant musician, brilliant folk musician, who will say to each other, why are we doing this particular thing? And it might be exposure, it might be money, it might be different, it might be practice. We go busking sometimes because we figure we go to York, which is Harry Potter. Imagine Diagon Alley from Harry Potter, and that's York for you. Amazing old city. We go down and we busk and we look at it as paid practice.
And I love this. What I hear, one of the things I hear from this is just that you take initiative. And of course, with a lot of people that I've coached in getting gigs and building their careers, there's a lot of like specific ways that people can take initiative. But I think the overlying thing that I hear is that you're taking initiative. You're taking initiative to get work. And yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. This is everything I hope for and more. So I want to just wrap up and just tell people again that you can find Clare at Rebecca Clare claredouglas.com. That's CLARE. We'll have this all in the show notes, wherever it is. You can also go on YouTube to Douglas and Moss, their YouTube channel. Yeah, just thank you so much. I want to thank our sponsor one more time, Electric Violin Shop. They are all things electric strings. Call them at their phone number and speak to a human about any questions you have about gear. Their website is electricviolinshop.com. And I should pitch our academy, which is our coaching community, which Claire is a member of. And as we were having this conversation, the last thing I'll share today, first of all, if you're listening, join the academy. Go to christianhouse.com and join. But as I was having this conversation, because when we started this conversation, just being completely transparent, Claire, I was like, oh, I have to make this episode. And it was putting all these pressure on myself. And as we were having it, I had this realization that it's I just want to have conversations with members, with people like you who, because we've had a relationship over some time. And when I think about it that way, it feels so much more productive. It's, just that we are a community and that we're sharing the experiences that we have because they're useful for each of us. Like me hearing you talk today about how you think about your life, it does help me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I do get a lot from the community and from all the work you do. As we met in person several years ago now, when I came to one of your weekend workshops in London, and the freedom that you facilitate for particularly those of us who are trying to become more free from maybe the classical constraints, it's amazing. And I've used your resources, your ideas shamelessly in my teaching, and it informs my playing as well. Whenever I'm looking to maybe think about other ways to go with the work that I do with Douglas and Moss, I don't actually always go to folk. I listen to one of your classes, and there's always something there, and I think, oh yeah, I could do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks again so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.